Central Florida rail fanning. Sometimes bland, sometimes grand. And judging by the length of this video, you might know today's answer. Welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. As I mentioned, today we're rail fanning the Central Florida region, and our routing on search of trains would take us through Lakeland, Mulberry, and eventually back to Tampa. And every stop along the way had something special about it. The first train that you can see passing here is 0708, a 6 times weekly local out of Winston Yard, which spends the early to late mornings working west of there, making last mile freight deliveries to customers. I'm not going to talk too much about this guy because I've already got a full video in progress about this one, but it was still a part of the day with its unique aspects. Afterwards, a notification from a friend would bring us around east to Lakeland Junction, where train Q452 coming north out of Miami, Florida would be coming our way. Here we've got the drone in the air in a way to kind of demonstrate the layout of Lakeland Junction. The train is currently headed west, and will take this north leg of the Lakeland Junction Y to turn north onto the Vitus subdivision. Normally he would continue straight on this bypass track and head down the hill into Winston Yard to make some pickups and drop-offs, but I guess he doesn't have that duty today. And since they already swapped crews over at Carter's Siding, about 10 miles east of here, they've got a fresh crew for the road ahead. As you can tell, CSX GEVO number 3194, specially painted for law enforcement, would be leading the way solo with another engine distributed in the middle of the train.
222, medium clear, like connection. Main is our own thing.
Another point of interest is what's in the background, the continuing construction of the new Bonnet Springs Park, which is now slated for completion by the end of this year, which honestly doesn't look too far out of reach. Construction over the last couple of months has been rapid and looks to be solid as well. You can definitely count on me getting an admission to this park once it opens and catching a train atop one of those giant hills. Since in the space that it's being built on back in the day, there used to be a train yard. Lakeland Yard used to reside there before they moved everything down the hill west over to Winston. .452 was on his way north, and the radio would soon light up with some action in the Bone Valley. Train 0730 was leaving the south end of Winston Yard, headed down south bound for New Wales. We caught up to the train at Mulberry Yard, leaving out of the south end of Prairie, and headed down south to Bradley Junction, where they would turn northwest and then be within miles from the New Wales phosphate plant. Some nice power on this one too, as he begins to lug his train through what's left of downtown Mulberry. On his way to the New Wales phosphate facility, he'd have 2 main components for that place. These first 2 tank cars would be carrying molten sulfur, a key ingredient in making diammonium phosphate fertilizer. And these empty hoppers, which are the rest of his train, is what they will load that finished phosphate into when it's done. And then they'll ship it out northward someday to customers awaiting on the other side of the country. With what I believe to be a 15 to 25 mile an hour speed restriction in the Bone Valley, chasing trains is not tough down here. So I found one more shot to try, the middle of nowhere crossing of Old State Highway 37. I like the power on this train for a number of reasons. Most people would immediately point out the two Canadian Pacific foreign engines trailing, but the two CSX units leading really stoked my interests as well. First off, the leader, CSX 155, still wearing the classic Yellow Nose 2 paint scheme, and with a faster bell, which is just something I personally like, and CSX number 4, which is very close to the lowest numbered locomotive on CSX, and something about the low number AC-44 locomotives just intrigued my interest. So overall, a very intriguing lash up on today's 0730. And that would be the end of action for right now, so we grab a bite to eat and make our way to Tampa. Making our way into town, Amtrak Silver Star number 91 would be the first train we'd snag, crossing 50th Street on his way back eastward toward Auburndale and eventually Miami. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get much of this on video, so I'm going to have to document it as best I can via maps. We had come to Tampa in search of some Canadian National engines that we had heard had come into town a few days earlier. However, after driving around for a little while, we couldn't really find them, and after realizing that they weren't in the yard, but also knowing that the empty ethanol train that they were assigned to take north was still here, we had no idea what to do. So we decided to start driving around Tampa to see if we could find them elsewhere. And as process of elimination, I made the decision to drive over to the port of Tampa, since that's where the train that they brought down here would be, even if the power wasn't. And making the right turn onto Hemlock Street, right there in front of us were tank cars rolling across the crossing out of the port. So we had a feeling, and we swung a U-turn out of there to get over to the next crossing to see just what this was. I was pretty sure I knew what it was, considering I knew what the train looked like, but pulling up at the next railroad crossing confirmed our suspicions. Rolling across the road now is what we local rail fans tend to call the port job, which is the railroad movement that either brings loaded ethanol trains to the port of Tampa or empty ones back from there. And right now, they're bringing an empty one out, since this is the train that these three Canadian engines brought down here on Friday. Now making an eastward turn across 22nd Street, this yard job would make a number of twists and turns throughout downtown Tampa to make it back to Yeoman Yard. Us ourselves weaving our way through the endless overpasses and interstates of Tampa over to North 34th Street. And looking westward, we can see where this track branches in two ways. To the left, the Port of Tampa, and to the right, the CSX Clearwater subdivision, which makes a few weaves and turns of its own, eventually ending up in St. Petersburg. This really goes to show you how long these trains are. Sitting at this light in a rear view mirror, he's passing back there. You look up this way, he's still passing down there too. Pretty neat. Finally, back to 50th Street. The same spot that we got Amtrak 91 from earlier, now just a quarter mile south of there on the Yeoman side rather than the Uceda side. The first and third locomotives are identical EMD SD75I locomotives, but the middle locomotive is a GE-built C44-9CWL. This type of build is pretty much not seen anywhere besides Canadian National and BC Rail. And ironically enough, this technically is a BC Rail locomotive, though in Canadian National paint. Now, a BCOL marked locomotive would normally wear one of these two paint jobs. However, this one is wearing Canadian National colors because in 2010 it caught fire and scorched its original paint job. And since BC Rail was absorbed by Canadian National sometime back, this is the paint job it got in repair. Still a sweet sight nonetheless. Well, there goes the second ever Tampa port job that I can say I've caught before, and this one was even better because it was a sheer surprise that we had no idea was coming. Otherwise though, we waited out the rest of our day around Yeoman Yard to see what else would come by, and surprisingly it wasn't long until something else did. Within 20 minutes we already had another train calling signals headed towards Yeoman Yard, so we moved around the corner to Control Point TS for the catch. Coming off of the Yeoman Yard bypass and turning south onto the Tampa Terminal subdivision is CSX train K339, an as-needed local job of phosphate loads fresh out of the ground at Mosaic's Agrock mine, coming north out of the Bone Valley and now turning south only miles from their final destination at the Riverview Phosphate Plant on the banks of the Alafaya River. Now, it's about 6:30 in the evening, and CSX train 0704 has come on duty and has begun to build their train out of the west end of Yeoman Yard to prepare for their work tonight. We had come over here to watch them build their train and were completely ignoring Q442 on the east end building their train out of the yard as normal, though with an odd twist tonight. I didn't care much for 442 because I believed that he wouldn't take off from the yard until we would have to leave. That was until we drove around to the east end anyway to check on 442 and saw his bottom end crossing the bypass canal, meaning he was done and leaving. Even then, I thought as we were still driving east, no big deal, just Q442, he runs every day. That was until I heard his job briefing. Then we booked it to Valrico. This would be our last shot of the day, and probably the best shot of the day, as Q442 with a very odd twist speeds out of Yeoman Yard and through Valrico Junction. Q442-23 speeding out of Yeoman Yard with his normal block of mixed freight commerce traffic would have the 3 Canadian National locomotives leading and 2 CSX engines trailing, with the 3 Canadian National locomotives being from the ethanol train and the 2 CSX locomotives being the original power for Q442. But with that said, why is the foreign power on here? Well, that's because of this. The twist tonight was that Yeoman made the decision to combine the empty ethanol train with the regular Q442, sending them both out at one time as one train. This resulted in the 5 locomotive lash-up on tonight's train, since when the 2 trains do finally separate, they have to have the power for each train so they can each continue their journeys. Wow, that would be an incredible end to a random Sunday out rail fanning on the Central Florida Iron. Once again, I'm outdone by the results that we got compared to what I expected when I woke up in the morning. Some crazy cool stuff today with some crazy cool people who met up with me along the way. It's been an awesome outing, and I thank you for virtually joining me. And until the next one, this is Kotabeaner, and I'll see you then on the Sunshine State Rails.